We've got more court transcripts to go over in the case of Barry Morphew from his preliminary hearing day 1. We will be done with day 1 after this. But this is the problem when judges and courts and counties don't allow excellent places like Court TV to just stream the whole trial live. Criminal cases, whether it's the preliminary hearing or the actual trial or what. It means people like me are forced to pay more than $300 for court transcripts and read them aloud like I did coming up in this video. Something gets lost in translation. We don't get to see the facial expressions. We don't get to hear the voices of the witnesses on the stand. Look at what they're looking at, hear their intonations, see the glances, and see everything we want to see. That's why Court TV is so popular with these trials and Law and Crime Network and all those places. Basically, Barry's lawyer, Iris Eaton, is going to paint Suzanne as some kind of gone girl homewrecker who's off and flipping back and forth, this whoremonger in bed with her husband, in bed with her boyfriend, yada yada yada. Iris Eaton really digs into the affair of Suzanne and Jeff Libler in this upcoming August 9th transcript, how they flipped from using LinkedIn to secretly messaging each other on WhatsApp. This was funny to me when Suzanne called Barry simple and not intellectually stimulating. Suzanne talked with Jeff about living in Ecuador. All of that is going to be dug into and really honed in on by Barry's lawyer because she's talking about Suzanne sending messages in Spanish and all this stuff. I'm so glad the charges against Barry Morphew were dropped while Suzanne was still missing. So now if Barry is ever charged again, I think the state will have a much stronger case now than they would have before she was found. We don't even know what evidence they have now and where it points. But we know we've seen some movements with this lawsuit, probably the straw that broke the camel's back in God's eyes, that Barry had issued against a lot of people, but now that's changing too. Perhaps maybe there's some settlements, there's some parties being dismissed, maybe the whole lawsuit will be dismissed, we don't know. But during the prelims, as you'll hear coming up, Barry's lawyer was practicing a lot of Jedi mind tricks when she's talking about Suzanne's iCloud activities. It's just as confusing as the non-Barry Morphew DNA. It throws confusions in a jury's mind. And Barry's lawyer is focusing on those loving communications between Suzanne and Jeff in Spanish. And it's just this whole scenario being painted of Suzanne hiding off in Ecuador waiting for Jeff. But Suzanne's phone was never found. Barry's attorney is entering doubt and questioning whether Suzanne's charger was taken as well from her bedside. It's not clear. They talk about Suzanne's text with her best friend, Sheila Oliver. Suzanne talks about learning to detach, basically, from loving Barry, and how Barry was scared of Suzanne's pull away, as Suzanne called it, like pulling away. He could sense it. It made him scared, probably for a number of reasons. Probably monetarily, he was losing control of Suzanne, but all the trips are focused on when Suzanne went to see Sheila in Indiana. Suzanne took care of some type of house documents, but she also tacked on trips to see Jeff in Marco Island, Florida, or solo trips to New Orleans. It's a very annoying line of questioning. I know criminal defense attorneys have a job to do. It gets really annoying. It's kind of like, what's your point? What is she getting to? I don't know why they just can't give the documentation and details right in front of the witnesses so they won't have to keep going back and forth. Like, and did you say this? And did you do this? Of course, the witness won't have all these, the entire timeline of thousands of terabytes of data right in front, right in their brains. But what's the point of detailing all these multiple nights that Suzanne spent with Jeff all over the country? They get into the spy pen. Again, she talks about Suzanne seeing Barry and Jeff back to back to back. In essence, calling her like a whoremonger. I know the point is Iris Eaton is trying to focus on Suzanne's deception and the way she manipulated her family, how her dad got mad, and Suzanne cut one trip short, from seeing him to go see Jeff. February 2020 sounds like the last time Jeff and Suzanne saw each other in Marco Island, and they were planning to see each other in March of 2020 in Colorado, but that was thwarted due to the shutdown. And then they talk about Jeff lying, how Jeff claimed he saw Suzanne last or talked to her last in December of 2019, but obviously he had spoken with her or seen her later than that point. He was scared, but he's the one who got Suzanne into mountain biking and all that stuff. In the end, Judge Murphy is probably a little frustrated. We can't hear it though, just through his words. He speaks about the defense using up more time than the prosecution, droning on, which makes sense. Because Iris really asks a lot of questions. There's a lot of confusion. You can hear back and forth. It's really annoying. But I did include, I had forgotten from 2 years ago what I had included in this video. I had found an article where Jeff Libler was quoted about going to Marco Island. It says Jeff Libler from Michigan, I'm assuming it's the same man, and how he was down there with his family, with at least 4 of his children. His daughter's like a swimmer or something in some type of swimming competition, and how he was down there visiting. But this was during a time I don't think Suzanne was down there with him. I found that interesting, that article. And also I did talk about, I put some screenshots in there of when the Morphew family visited Turks and Caicos, which is kind of sort of close to the Cayman Islands, because there was a line of questioning about when exactly the Morphew family was in the Cayman Islands. Overall, just watch this if you're interested in what I previously had read aloud about the Morphew Day 1 preliminary. So after this, we will be done with Day 1. And then the next 4 videos I put up about the Morphew case should cover Day 2. Then we'll be done with Day 1 and Day 2 of Barry Morphew's preliminary hearing. There was a Day 3 and a Day 4. I'm not sure if I'm going to just dig all into covering that. I'm really interested in the cases where I can actually get the courtroom footage. It's much more interesting and intriguing, although this case is so important, and so that's why I did buy the transcripts, because our justice system, our due process system should be transparent. A lot of people speak of this, like Emily D. Baker, other lawyers speak of the frustration of when it's not transparent. It makes you wonder what's really going on behind the scenes. You know, if you're not driving to Colorado, and even if you go there, you're not guaranteed to get in the courtroom. And even if you get in the courtroom, it's not like you can pull out your phone and record what's happening in order to show viewers. But I'm off my rant about that. But this is what's coming up. We'll see if I ever do Day 3 or 4. Maybe I'll just wait it out until Suzanne's perpetrator is arrested, and then I hope we get to see some of this due process in person. Listen up. Thanks for watching this. We'll see when I can put up the next 4 videos. Always check the playlist if you're looking for more Barry Morphew, Suzanne Morphew information. And I think that's it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Plunder. Let's continue reading portions of Barry Lee Morphew's court transcript from Monday, August 9th. We left off at the point where Barry's lawyer, Iris Eaton, is cross-examining FBI agent Kenneth Harris. They are discussing how Suzanne Morphew communicated with Jeff Libler. Yes, and Miss Morphew logged into this LinkedIn account that she created in August 2018 multiple times from August 2018 up until she goes missing. Is that right? I don't have that date in front of me, but it sounds right, yes. Okay, so that's another thing that Mr. Libler may not have been so accurate about when he was telling you his version of events, right? That they were not talking by LinkedIn? Right. I don't know that they were talking by LinkedIn. You just know that she was logging in a lot and started her account in 2018, right? Yes. So Mr. Libler claims that as a result of his daughter finding out about, I don't think the daughter defines it as an affair, but something going on between Mr. Libler and another woman, that Suzanne reaches out to him after a period of time where they are not talking, correct? That's what Mr. Libler claims, yes. And that when Ms. Morphew reaches out to him, that's when they really start a full-on affair, right? So once they started talking at some point, Suzanne is talking about her trip to New Orleans that she's planning for February. She says something about liking surprises and asks Jeff if he wants to meet her there. And that's when they meet, and that's when the physical affair begins in earnest. Okay, and this is what Mr. Libler is telling you, right? Yes. Okay, so at the time when Ms. Morphew pursues Mr. Libler again, they decide to create secret WhatsApp accounts so they can speak to each other without their spouses or anybody else knowing, correct? I'm sorry, I just don't remember whether that's the time frame. They do eventually create WhatsApp accounts. I don't remember if it was right at that point in 2018. That's what Mr. Libler claimed to you, that once Ms. Morphew reached out to him
Their way to conceal this affair was to use the secret WhatsApp accounts, right? Yes. And at that time is when Mr. Libler claimed to you that he created this secret LinkedIn account, the Jeff SL account, so that they could also communicate in that format too? Sorry, I'm just not remembering whether he says that at 2018 or 2019, because what he talks about is they are talking on the phone, and at some point at the end of 2019, Suzanne says to him that Barry is basically looking at the communications and we need to switch. So it seems like that's the point at which they are exclusively, or they moved towards not talking on the phone anymore and they're using LinkedIn and WhatsApp. I don't remember whether they're using LinkedIn and WhatsApp all the way through up to that point. Okay, can you point me to where Ms. Morphew says Mr. Morphew is looking at her communications? I think I can. What I can point to is Mr. Libler tells us. Right, can you point me to that? Yes, I think so. Sorry, I don't have I have where Mr. Libler tells us they stopped talking on the phone in December of 2019, and that's when he created the Jeffrey SL, deleted his second LinkedIn. Oh, sorry, that's when he deleted the account after Suzanne disappeared. Agent Harris, I didn't hear it in the recording, so I never heard where Mr. Libler said Mr. Morphew was checking her phone and checking her accounts. So that's why I'm asking you to point me. Okay, I can maybe read you what you're thinking you believe the statement. Quote, she was worried, like, what if Barry looked up records? He had no idea that we talked to each other, end quote. Is that maybe what you're thinking? Yes, when you believe so, yes. Okay, so not that Barry was looking or had looked, but what if Barry looked up the records? And also, Mr. Libler said he had no idea that we talked to each other. Yes, so they are communicating on WhatsApp, on LinkedIn, but the evidence that you received back were limited phone records from Mr. Libler and none of Mr. Libler's other accounts that he had when he was communicating with Ms. Morphew, right? Correct. Okay. And you also don't have a download or information from Suzanne's actual phone because her phone was not seized at the scene. Is that right? At the house. Her phone was never found. Her phone wasn't found. The other thing that wasn't found was the charger that she leaves plugged into her phone next to her bed, right? I have heard that. I don't know it firsthand. Okay. So all we have from Ms. Morphew is what's saved on her iCloud. Can you clarify what you mean by all we have? Well, from Suzanne's actual communications originating from her. I know that we have text messages between Sheila Oliver and herself, but originating from Ms. Morphew, the only evidence we have is from her iCloud. We don't have her phone, her download, etc. Yes, and we have her phone records from the phone company. That's right, and we have her phone records. And you're right, we have her LinkedIn messages going back about a month prior to her missing. Yes. Okay, so do you know what a SIM card is? Generally, yes. And you take it out with like a safety pin or a paper clip, right? Yes, and when you take a SIM card out of a phone, what happens? Again, I'm not a phone expert, but your phone is not going to work. Right, and if you put a different SIM card into the phone, it actually then behaves like a different phone. It can't be detected as the original phone, is that right? Again, I don't feel qualified to answer that. Okay, so do you know whether or not Ms. Morphew had a SIM card? I do not. Do you know whether or not an electronic device that she used was missing from the house when the searches were conducted? I do not. Okay, so let's talk about November 2018. On November 26, 2018, there were 10 calls on that day between Mr. Libler and Ms. Morphew, totaling more than 4 hours. Do you recall that? I don't recall the specifics of the numbers. You said November? November 26, 2018. Yeah, I don't have all the data, but I have some in front of me. I see a number of calls on the 26th. 33 minutes, 6 minutes, 77 minutes, 12 minutes, 153 minutes. That's right. You see the one that's 153 minutes? Yes, okay. Although it says call wait, I don't know what that means versus the other entries. Okay, but you see a bunch of calls, like 10 calls. Is that approximately 10 phone calls on November 26, 2018? I see, yeah, I've got 7 on here. Okay. And Suzanne didn't tell Sheila Oliver, her best friend, about these communications she was having with Mr. Libler. We've established that, right? Correct. But she does tell Sheila Oliver on the next day, November 27th, 2018, saying, I had a rough talk with B. Not exactly how I wanted it to go, but made me some. And talking about breaking the codependency is big. Told him I will give him total freedom to go and do without question and not checking where his phone is. End quote. Do you recall that? I do. The next day after this bulk of hours of communications with Mr. Libler, right? Yes, but she didn't mention the new relationship she was building with Mr. Libler while she was complaining about Mr. Morphew, right? Correct. Mr. Lindsay, I'm going to object. That's been asked and answered at least twice. Judge Murphy, yeah, I think we've thoroughly established that Ms. Oliver was completely unaware of the relationship. Ms. Eaton, now, Ms. Morphew and Mr. Libler are talking on the phone again in the beginning of January 2019. Between January 4th and January 11th, they talked 26 times. I don't have all those calls in front of me. Okay, would you like to look at them? Sure. Ms. Eaton, may I approach? Between January 4th and January 11th, there are 26 phone calls between Ms. Morphew and Mr. Libler. Judge Murphy, is that of 19? Ms. Eaton, sorry, yes. Judge, okay. Ms. Eaton, 2019. I think I counted 19, but that may just be because I need readers. Ms. Eaton, and this includes 6 calls on January 11th, totaling an hour. Sorry, I don't have January 11th. I have one. I have January 2nd through January 10th. Miss Eaton, may I approach the witness, Your Honor? Judge, yes. Miss Eaton, maybe that's why your count was off. There were 6 calls on January 11th, totaling an hour of talk time. Yes, I'll trust your math. Okay, well, on January 12th, Suzanne is texting Sheila and she's saying, quote, I'm learning to detach with the love thing, and it's a hard balance to detach and still seem loving, end quote, right? Yes, I remember that text. And she said, quote, I think he's scared of my pull away, end quote. Right? Yes, without having it in front of me, that sounds, yes. Okay, so the phone calls that we have from Mr. Libler's phone records up until the mid-December of 2019 are replete with daily phone calls, multiple phone calls, even when Mr. Libler is on vacation in the Cayman Islands, multiple phone calls between himself and Ms. Morphew. That right? I'm talking throughout the duration of 2019. Yes, I think I'm not sure whether Mr. Libler was on vacation or whether the Morphews were at that point, but yes, okay. Side note, just to help the FBI here, I see on June 2nd, 2019, there were social media photos that Macy Morphew posted from Turks and Caicos, which is near the Cayman Islands. So I'm assuming the Morphew family was on vacation in the Turks and Caicos Islands on June 2nd, 2019. According to these social media photos, there seemed to be confusion in that portion of the court hearing about exactly who was in the Cayman Island area. Hopefully that helps. Yes. So let's talk about their actual trips that Mr. Libler told you about. So Ms. Morphew would go to Florida and she would tell Mr. Morphew that she was there to visit her dad. And when she would be there, she'd tag on a trip to Mr. Libler. She did that a few times, right? So that, the Florida, the February 2020, yes. And then there was also, I'm trying to remember when the other Florida one was. I think it was April of 2019, yes. Right. Oh, actually, no. That was February 2019. February. Valentine's Day. February 2019 was New Orleans. Yes, and then right after that, she went to Valentine's Day on February 2019, so back to back. I'm sorry, I'm misunderstanding your question. Okay, so let's start here. Mr. Morphew used her, I think they mean Ms. Morphew used her seeing her dad so that she could see Mr. Libler on one occasion that we're talking about in at least one trip to Florida that you'll recall. Yes, the February 2020 trip, she was going to see both Sheila and her father, yes. Okay, now she would also use Sheila as an excuse. She would tell Mr. Morphew, her husband, I'm going to hang out and have a girls' trip with Sheila, but then she'd be tagging on a trip to see her lover, Mr. Libler, right? Yes. She went back to Indiana to see, I think she was taking care of some house documents, is what Mr. Libler believes, in Indiana, and saw Sheila. And then she also saw Mr. Libler, yes. Okay. So let's start at the beginning of their trips. New Orleans, 2019, February 11th through February 14th, 2019 is the first time that Mr. Libler claims that they saw each other, right? Yes. And first time after 1989, yes. And Mr. Libler reports to you that he told Ms. Morphew that he'd be in New Orleans for a work trip, and she just showed up out of the blue, right? Yes. And Ms. Morphew told her friend Sheila about this trip she took on her own. She was taking a solo trip, right? Yes. And that's what Ms. Morphew told her husband, Mr. Morphew, right? I don't know that I know in that context what she told Mr. Morphew. Okay, well, Mr. Morphew, when he was interviewed by you, told you that he thought she was going on her own to... Yes, sorry. That's okay. And Miss Morphew actually gave a little bit more of, information to her best friend, Sheila Oliver, and told her that, oh, this is the trip where she met a woman who was there at a convention and they hit it off, right? Yes. And Ms. Oliver reports that her best friend tells her it was really nice to talk to somebody, right? Yes. Then, in February 2019, they saw each other again in Florida for Valentine's Day. So, February 2019, you said they were in New Orleans for Valentine's Day. You said the end of the trip was February 14th, and then they saw each other. They saw each other in Marco Island. I'm sorry, I'm just not remembering that that's when that is. Sure, so after New Orleans, it was a couple of weeks later, so it would be later in February, right? I think he says a couple of weeks later we meet up in Florida. It was Valentine's Day. Didn't you say Valentine's Day was both years? They saw each other both years. I'm sorry. Okay, this is where I'm confused. I thought you were talking about successively in 2019 New Orleans, and then right afterwards. That's right afterwards again. So they see each other in New Orleans in February 2019. Let me give you the dates. Then they see each other in Florida. Sorry, they were in New Orleans Valentine's Day. Yes. Sorry, and then they see each other in Florida a couple of weeks later in 2019. Yes, okay, that's why I was confused. You were saying Florida for Valentine's Day. Sorry, I apologize. No worries, I apologize. Okay, so let's talk about Suzanne Morphew's alibi when she went on this trip to see and saw Mr. Libler in Florida in 2019. So you interviewed her dad, Gene Mormon, on May 19th, 2020, right? I did not, but somebody did. Oh, sorry, law enforcement did. Yes, and this was after his daughter went missing. Yes, and Mr. Mormon told you the last time he saw Suzanne was 2 years prior, right? Yes, not you, but law enforcement. Yes, I'm sorry, I just don't remember the content of that interview, so if you could refresh my memory. Sure, let me ask you this question. Do you recall Mr. Mormon saying that he was upset with his daughter because she was supposed to stay with him for 4 days, but abruptly left after 3 days to meet her husband on the West Coast? I do remember saying that he was upset because she left early, yes. But you know from your investigation, at least from what Mr. Libler claimed, that she was in Florida in 2019, right? Yes. You don't know of any trip that Mr. and Ms. Morphew were on in February of 2019 where she left Florida to go meet Barry on the West Coast, correct? Just so I'm understanding, anywhere Suzanne left, no, I'm not aware. And on this trip, when she is with Mr. Libler in Florida in 2019, she tells Sheila that she's enjoying time with her dad and she's going back to the beach for a few nights to have a beach day. And this is while she's about to see Mr. Libler, correct? Correct. And Miss Oliver is so happy for her best friend that she is spending time with her dad and Suzanne says, quote, "We are both enjoying it," end quote, right? I don't recall that text specifically, but it sounds right, yes. And then Suzanne texts her best friend and says, quote, "I'm here solo now," end quote, correct. Do you happen to have that? Yes. Text, just to be able to see it? I see it. And then Suzanne says, quote, "I just made it to a little spot in Naples for the next few nights," end quote, right? Yes. And Miss Oliver responds saying she was surprised she was staying an extra few nights, and Suzanne Morphew says, quote, "B said stay. He wants me to have more beach time." Correct? Yes. And Ms. Morphew is with Mr. Libler, correct? Yes. And then she talks about having a great time on Marco Island, right? Yes. And this is actually a trip that Mr. Libler, when you interviewed him, talked about having a secret rendezvous with Ms. Morphew on. Yeah. So, in 2019 so far, she sees Mr. Libler twice, and then Miss Oliver comes to see Ms. Morphew in Colorado. She comes with her family, correct? Yes, there's no text messages after she leaves about any kind of disruptive, bad marital situation going on between Mr. Morphew and her best friend Suzanne, correct? Right after she leaves, not that I recall. But then Ms. Morphew takes another trip to see and goes to Indiana and she sees Mr. Libler there, correct? Yes, and actually that was the trip that you talked about where she used Sheila as an excuse because she saw Sheila on that trip, but right after she also tagged on a trip to hang out with Mr. Libler, correct? Was this I believe like June or July of 2019? April 2019. April, okay, yes. And so after Ms. Oliver and Ms. Morphew see each other, you remember Ms. Oliver checked in with Ms. Morphew and says, quote, "I hope the rest of your Indiana trip went well and that your transition was good and you're feeling well," end quote, right? Yes. And then Ms. Morphew writes back, quote, "Got stuck there for a few more days because of weather. Got back Friday," end quote, correct? Yes. She was hanging out with Mr. Libler, correct? Yes. Then there's July 2019 in Michigan, right? We're not going to get into it. Yes. They see each other again. Yes. Then they see each other again after that, October 2019 in Dallas, Texas, right? Yes. And so by this point in 2019, they have spent multiple nights together, a lot of time together, traveling all over the country. Yes. And then we get to February 2020 in Florida around Valentine's Day. Yes. And this is the trip where the secret pen was given to from Sheila to Suzanne, right? Correct. Okay, and this actually is the trip where Ms. Morphew planned this. So she's going to see Ms. Oliver, then Mr. Libler, and then her husband, Mr. Morphew, back to back to back, correct? So I don't think she was planning on seeing Barry from my recollection. She was going to be down to see her father and Sheila and Mr. Libler, and then Barry said he wanted to come because he didn't want to spend a second Valentine's Day apart. Right, with his wife. Right, and you can hear on the pen recording from then that Suzanne was with Sheila and they're watching the Super Bowl and they talk about making mojitos and they're a little tipsy, correct? I remember them talking about making mojitos and sounding like they were having a good time. Yes, and then Miss Oliver goes home after their girl trip and Ms. Morphew tells Sheila that she's going to visit her dad, right? Yes, but instead, Ms. Morphew has a multi-day trip with Mr. Libler on Marco Island before Mr. Morphew comes. Yes, and this is important for law enforcement to find out because Ms. Morphew in February 2020, was having this crossover with her best friend and Mr. Libler again and You asked Ms. Oliver, quote, "Are you aware of Ms. Morphew being involved in any other type of relationship?" End quote. And she said no, and you meant male relationship, correct? Correct. Then Mr. Libler and Ms. Morphew made a plan for him to come to Colorado in March 2020, but then COVID hit, correct? Actually, I don't remember them making the plans for the Colorado trip. Mr. Libler claimed that he was going to come see Ms. Morphew in Colorado in 2020. That's what he claimed. Yeah. They're talking about Suzanne Morphew and Jeff Libler's getaway to Marco Island. I want to show you what I found. It's pretty interesting. They mentioned Marco Island 3 times, so I said, let me just Google Jeff Libler and Marco Island to see what I can find. So it appears that Suzanne and Jeff Libler last saw each other in February 2020. It sounds like that's what they're saying in this portion of the transcript. It gets really confusing, but they did at some point have a multi-day trip together at Marco Island. I'm not sure where they stayed, in February 2020 in Florida. And we can notice that Barry's lawyer likes to insist that it was back to back to back. We know what she's insinuating about Suzanne's character when she says that. But I found this so interesting. A little side note in the NaplesNews.com. They have an article that was posted on March 18th, 2020, where it actually mentions Jeff Libler. He was being interviewed. It doesn't mention Suzanne Morphew at all that I can find. They were just talking about beaches being closed and such. We just left off at the point where Barry's lawyer is asking about some sort of planned March 2020 trip where Jeff Libler allegedly was planning to come out to Colorado, but he couldn't because of the shutdown. I found this so interesting that he would even be mentioned in this article. Unfortunately, they don't have a photo of him anywhere, but he does speak about coming down with his children. It doesn't talk about his wife coming down there with him, but it does speak about his children coming with him. So here it is. Jeff Libler, who took advantage of the cheap flights and flew in from Michigan with his 4 kids. Jeff has 6 kids, so perhaps they meant 4 of his kids. Had plans to go to the beach again Thursday. Libler has parents in Southwest Florida and wanted to give his daughters, who are competitive swimmers, a chance to continue training. "I'm just a little bummed out," he said, "but it's understandable." I just had to throw that in there. I will place the link below if you want to read the article yourself. But I thought, oh my goodness, Marco Island must be a place that he normally goes quite a bit. And so since it was March 18th, I'm not sure if that's the day they actually interviewed him, but since this article was published March 18th, 2020, just a few months before Suzanne went missing, I found it curious that Jeff Libler was down there in Marco Island. Perhaps that's why they had their multi-day trip in Marco Island, because it's a place perhaps where Libler was accustomed to vacationing. And when I read this, that he was with his 4 children, I also wondered, oh my goodness, did he see Suzanne at all during this trip? I don't think so, as far as I can tell. From what I'm reading with the court transcripts, it appears as if they last saw each other February 2020 in person, from what I can glean. But as you can tell through the court transcripts, it's pretty difficult to get a handle on an exact timeline because FBI agent Harris doesn't appear to have the timeline in front of him, unfortunately, which would be easier because there's a lot that he doesn't know or remember, and Barry's lawyer got confused in there for a bit. Let's keep reading the actual transcript. I just wanted to throw that in there because I found it and I thought it was so curious. talked to Mr. Libler, he said when you first talked to him, it was over the phone on November 4th, 2020, right? Yes. And when you talked to him, he initially said the last time he talked to Suzanne Morphew was in December 2019, right? Yes. But that wasn't true, right? Correct. And by April 2020, they were talking about love, right? Yes, they were calling each other their soulmates, right? Correct. That they were meant for each other. Correct. And by April 14, 2020, they're exchanging love. I love you with all I have. You are the love of my life. I knew it when I walked through your door and touched you for the first time in 30 years. Correct. And they were best friends. That's how Mr. Libler described it, right? I don't know if he used the phrase best friends. They seemed to be talking as if they were lovers. And Ms. Morphew started biking because of him, right? Mountain biking. Correct. And she was actually drinking alcohol with him, something that she didn't do before. I don't think Jeff was the one that introduced alcohol for Ms. Morphew. He had introduced a particular kind, IPA, and she was drinking them because he liked them. And they were sending nudes to each other, right? They weren't just sending photographs, they were sending nude photographs back and forth to each other. Yes, there's a few of those in the LinkedIn records, yes. They were also, by April 2020, telling each other that they wanted to get married to each other, right? Yeah, they would say to each other, let's be husband and wife, or we need to get married. Mr. Libler told us that he didn't know whether in some ways Suzanne was kidding because they had started this mostly so that she could recoup and eventually get out of the marriage. And he had younger kids, and he didn't know if it was really going to be possible for them to get married. So his understanding of that was more playful, but they do say it quite often. So it's playful to say, quote, I'd love to be your husband. You have made me the happiest I've ever been. Only you, baby, I love you. I need you always and forever. Marry me, end quote. Yes. That sounds pretty, yes. Okay, even up until May 8th, 2020, they are talking about how much they love each other and they want to be with each other, correct? Correct. And they're again saying, why don't you marry me, right? Yes. I mean, if it matters, I don't know if they say that specific phrase. I think on the morning of May 9th, she says, quote, we need to be husband and wife. And on May 8th, he says, quote, you look good in biking gear, babe. You need to be my wife, end quote. Correct. Okay, so now we're at May 9th and it's COVID, right? Yes. People aren't permitted. People are being told they have to quarantine, right? Yes, there's a limit on travel. Yes. And at this time on May 9th, the girls, their daughters, are gone for the weekend, including on Mother's Day, right? Yes. So they were traveling during COVID, yes. Let's talk about May 9th specifically. Oh, yes. Right. And then Mr. Morphew was working on a lot of the day, May 9th. He was working in the morning, I believe, but not the afternoon. Okay, and before Mr. Morphew got home, Mr. Libler and Mr. Morphew were going back and forth and texting each other through LinkedIn, right? Sorry, you said Mr. Libler and Mr. Morphew. You're right, Ms. Morphew. And actually, the texting between them stopped on May 9th when Mr. Libler told Ms. Morphew, quote, my gang is home, end quote. Is that correct? Correct. And his gang, he has 6 children and a wife, right? Correct. So it is unknown. Because what they would do is they would text on LinkedIn and then tell each other on LinkedIn, it appears to be, that they could get on WA or WhatsApp so that they could actually have a face-to-face, like a FaceTime kind of conversation, right? Correct. And so that's why they use this secret WhatsApp account, correct? And so we don't have the return from the WhatsApp, right? From Mr. Libler. It's been deleted. There's no evidence of anything, right? Correct. And Ms. Morphew's phone has not been found, correct? Correct. So nobody knows whether or not the two of them communicated on WhatsApp at some point after he said, my gang is home, right? We asked Mr. Libler if he remembered talking to her, and he said he was not clear, but he does not remember getting on WhatsApp that afternoon. Right. but you couldn't corroborate that with any sort of evidence, right? Correct. And this is a loving relationship, what it appears to be, right? Yes, but Mr. Libler doesn't remember their last conversation they had, correct? Correct. Now, actually, I can clarify. He doesn't remember that they had a conversation, so if they didn't, there isn't content for him to remember. He made that clear. He wasn't sure whether they had a conversation at that point. So if they did have it, he does not remember it. But he does not remember for sure whether they actually had one at that point. Okay, you asked, quote, what was your last communication with her? End quote, right? You remember asking him that? Yes. And he said he didn't know, right? Yes. And he said, you said, quote, when was the last time you spoke? End quote. And he said, quote, I racked my brain on this one. I racked my brain on this one in the last 6 months, and I forget. And you said, quote, so you don't remember anything about the conversation? End quote. He said, no. Correct? Correct. So Sheila, as we've seen from the text messages, is hearing from Suzanne that Ms. Morphew feels stifled in this relationship, right? Yes. And Ms. Oliver reports that Ms. Morphew is feeling alone and isolated, and even says that Ms. Morphew was so unhappy that she would give it all up in a heartbeat, right? Yes. Her words. Yes. And that Ms. Morphew would gladly live in a shack. Correct? Yes. And some of this comes from Mr. Libler, who told you that Suzanne called Barry simple and not stimulating intellectually, right? Correct. Now, Miss Morphew and Mr. Libler talked about being together one day, right? Yes. Again, they talked about it. There was probably a long road ahead in Mr. Libler's mind as to when that could happen. And he said repeatedly he wanted to support Suzanne getting out on her own. And it was for her, whether he was able to be with her or not. But he had hoped that he could be, yes. But they also specifically talked about the low cost of living and the climate in Ecuador, right? Yes, and Suzanne made it clear, Mr. Libler told you that Suzanne made it clear that when she would leave, they would go without contact for a little while, right? Yes, she would say things like, quote, I'll wait on you, right? Yes, I'll wait for you, right? Yes, and they talked about Ecuador because it's a place where if you don't have a lot of money, it's a good place to retire, and there's good healthcare systems, correct? That's what Mr. Libler told you? Yes. And on December 29th, 2019, Suzanne's iCloud came up with a return that she was researching language schools in Ecuador, correct? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that entry. I'm showing you what I've marked as Defense Exhibit AAA and BBB. Now you thoroughly have reviewed, law enforcement has, Ms. Morphew's iCloud account, correct? Yes, I have not, but others have, yes. And you've been made aware, as part of the investigation, about as far as your job and your role here in terms of who Ms. Morphew is, what was happening with her, that there were some communications going on between Mr. Libler and Ms. Morphew about moving to Ecuador, correct? Yes, and what I'm showing you is Defense Exhibit BBB, is the file path where that document was located off of her iCloud account on December 27th, 2019. I see it. Does that seem accurate to you? Yes. And then AAA is the actual web page that was pulled up on December 27th, 2019 with that file path. Okay. Miss Eaton, so Your Honor, I'd move to admit AAA and BBB. Judge, Mr. Lindsay, can I voir dire?
Voir dire.
Can I voir dire?
Voir dire.
Voir dire, a preliminary examination of a witness or a jury by a judge or counsel. Voir dire is a legal phrase for a variety of procedures connected with jury trials. It originally referred to an oath taken by jurors to tell the truth. Mr. Lindsay, can I voir dire? Judge Murphy, sure. Mr. Lindsay, is there any information on either AAA or BBB that indicates when this was accessed? I see a created and modified and then an accessed date, I guess. The created date says July 13th, 2021. Yes. Accessed says August 5th, 2021, correct. Then it says modified December 27th, 2019. So do you have any independent information or recollection that this was actually accessed in December of 2019? I do not. Just reading off the document. That a fair statement? Yeah, I do not. Mr. Lindsay. Object to lack of foundation. I also object to the relevance of this. Judge Murphy. Agent Harris, is there a way to determine when this was accessed? The witness. Well, I would be asking my computer science guy. Judge. Right. Do you have the ability to answer that question? Witness. I do not. Ms. Eaton. Your Honor, this document was produced in discovery. Judge Murphy. Oh, I understand that. Ms. Eaton. Okay. And it goes to weight, not admissibility. I'd ask the court to accept it as an exhibit on that basis. Mr. Lindsay. We have a foundation objection, Judge. Judge Murphy. Well, I think we can all agree that if we don't know the when, we do know the what. That this web page was accessed by Suzanne Morphew's iPhone. Do we all agree on that? Mr. Lindsay. I guess we can, Judge. I don't think the agent knows that, but Judge Murphy, I can tell that from the triple B, so the date, Ms. Eaton is correct. The date goes more to weight rather than admissibility. Ms. Eaton. Your Honor, they haven't located Ms. Morphew's phone, so if they want to claim that it was created on July 13th, 2020 on her phone, then we're fine with that. Judge Murphy, I don't think they're going that far. I think I'm accepting that this web page regarding language course in Ecuador was accessed at some point by Ms. Morphew's iPhone. Mr. Lindsay. If I can make one other record, Judge, there's no tie to AAA to triple B. All we have in triple B is an image, 4573, but there's no indication of image here matches the image reference in triple B. Judge Murphy, I suppose to an extent I'm relying on counsel for that. Miss Eaton, it's in discovery. We can show it to the court. Mr. Lindsay. I don't think that matters whether it's in discovery or not. This is a foundational objection, Judge. Ms. Eaton, from her iCloud account, we're happy to show the court. Judge Murphy, I'll take your word for it. Ms. Eaton, okay. Judge Murphy, so if I wasn't clear, AAA and triple B are admitted. Ms. Eaton, Agent Harris, as Mr. Libler told you, his relationship and communications with Ms. Morphew indicated that she wouldn't mind a simple life, right? Yes. Now, Mr. Libler also indicated that he didn't believe that Mr. Morphew knew about him. Is that correct? That's right. Mr. Libler said that if he had an idea that we talked to each other, he would have come after me to talk to me, right? That's what he said, yes. And he said, quote, I thought about this quite a bit, and I just don't think Barry knew that Suzanne and I were together, end quote, right? That's what he said, yes. And you've confirmed with Mr. Libler that it sounds like nobody else really does know about you besides you and Suzanne, correct? Mr. Lindsay, object. Asked, answered many times. Judge Murphy, yeah, it has been. It has been so well established. I don't know why you keep asking the question. Miss Eaton, okay. And with the immense amount of closeness that Suzanne Morphew and Mr. Libler had, what Mr. Libler knew about Mr. Morphew didn't make him feel like Ms. Morphew was being physically abused by Mr. Morphew in any way, correct? I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question? Yes. How about this way? Mr. Libler didn't indicate to you that he believed, from what Suzanne had told him, that Ms. Morphew was being physically abused by Mr. Morphew? Yes. I think we asked him whether Suzanne had expressed not feeling safe, and he said as far as he knew, not physically, but emotionally, yes, but not physically. And you asked him point blank, did she ever tell you that she felt uncomfortable being alone with Barry or concerned for her safety in regards to Barry? And he said no. Correct. And even Mr. Libler said, there's a lot of things I'm afraid of, and not necessarily him, meaning Mr. Morphew, correct? Yes. At the time of the interview, we talked about, hold on, Not only was Mr. Libler claiming that he deleted everything because he didn't want Mr. Morphew's daughters to know, but it's also because he didn't want his own family to know, right? Correct. Mr. Lindsay. Objection. Asked and answered, Judge Murphy. Sort of. The answer has been Mr. Libler didn't want the Morphew children to know and didn't want Suzanne Morphew's legacy to be having an affair with that guy. But there, I don't recall a part of it regarding his, Mr. Lindsay. I'll withdraw the objection if the court doesn't recall it. There was testimony to that already. Correct, Ms. Eaton. And multiple times throughout your interview with Mr. Libler, he repeated that he didn't want to lose his job. He didn't want to lose his family. He was nervous about anybody finding out about it, correct? Correct. Now, Sheila Oliver and you worked together in February 2020. We talked about that a little bit to record Mr. Morphew, right? Not in February of 2020, November 2020. Yes, and in February 2020 she provided some taped conversations after you found out about the affair. You had Miss Oliver try and see if Mr. Morphew would reveal anything, is that right? I'm sorry, I'm not remembering what you're referring to. Okay, so, Mr. Lindsay, the date of the offense is May 2020, so I don't think that could have happened. Miss Eaton, February 2020, February 2021. Judge Murphy, could you, Miss Eaton, February 2021. Judge Murphy, start maybe the question over again? Miss Eaton, do you recall that in February 2021, after you found out and had more information about the affair, that you worked with Miss Oliver in February 2021 to tape record a conversation between herself and Mr. Morphew? So yes, Sheila was willing. I don't believe she ever did record a conversation, but yes. And what you learned was that Ms. Oliver was trying to inform Mr. Morphew, look, your wife was going to leave you. Did you know your wife was going to leave you? That's what the intent of this interview was between Ms. Oliver and Mr. Morphew, or this conversation, right? For some reason, I'm not remembering what you're referring to. Okay, let me go back. Ms. Eaton, I want to introduce CC and DD, Triple C and Triple D. May I approach? Judge Murphy, yes. Ms. Eaton, this is a follow-up to Triple A and Triple B, and it's Triple C and Triple D. Other search also that was located on Ms. Morphew's iCloud that was produced as part of discovery. I've shown you Triple C and Triple D. Yes, I see them. And does Triple C, actually, look at Triple D first, which would be the file path. Does it also appear to be modified on Friday, December 27th, 2019, the same as Triple A and Triple B? Yes. And Triple C is a search on Spanish dictionary on how to say I love you so much in Spanish. That's what it looks like, yes. Thank you. Your Honor, I'd move to introduce Exhibit Triple C and Triple D under the same provisions as before. Judge Murphy, I assume the same objection? Mr. Lindsay, may I?
Voir dire.
May I voir dire? Judge Murphy, sure. Mr. Lindsay, Agent Harris, any idea where this comes from besides potentially Ms. Morphew's iCloud? No. Same questions about when it's created, modified, access? Yeah, you just reading a document. Yeah, I'm reading the document that says created and accessed in addition to the modified. Created is July 13th, 2021. Any indication that anyone, Ms. Morphew or Mr. Libler, communicated in Spanish? No. Mr. Lindsay, Judge, again, I object to foundation and relevance. There is absolutely no tie to this to anything other than what's on her iCloud account. Now, if we want to put her entire iCloud account in, I can get a portable drive and provide it to the court for the court to review. But this is not relevant to probable cause, Judge. Period. It's not relevant. Judge Murphy, the foundation question I've already answered. There is a relevance objection for this particular exhibit, Miss Eaton. Miss Eaton, the relevance, the response to that, Your Honor, is it's highly relevant because Ms. Morphew is missing, and there's communications with herself and her lover that they wanted to go to Ecuador. There are searches about schools in Ecuador at the same time. and also communications, loving communications in another language that happens to be the Ecuadorian language Spanish. So we believe this is relevant if we're talking about Mr. Morphew murdering somebody right now when there's no body. We believe it's just as relevant as all the other evidence being put in today. Judge Murphy: Okay, I'll reiterate. I sound like a broken record, but I'm the trier of fact. I can determine in my head what's relevant for me making the decisions that I'm obligated to make and what isn't. So as long as there's some argument of relevance, I'll generally allow exhibits to be introduced at a preliminary hearing. So I will allow the introduction of Triple D and Triple C. Now that gets us to 5. So I think we're going to have to wind things down, so you can step down, Agent Harris. So I need to talk about 3 things before we close up shop. First of all, tomorrow we have treatment court. It starts at 7:30. It usually lasts until 9:30. I'll push to get it done by 9, so you can be here by 9, but if the door is closed, don't enter. Those are confidential proceedings. We'll let you in as soon as we're finished. Second, just so everyone is aware of time, by my calculations, the prosecution has used up 2 hours, 50 minutes. Defense, 3 hours, 45 minutes. And then, lastly, I'd ask the attorneys maybe to consult after we're done here today to maybe resolve this issue with regard to Agent Harris's report so that we don't have to waste time talking about that tomorrow. Hopefully the answer is there and we won't have to address it on the record. Mr. Lindsay: Judge, we can discuss it right now. It was produced at our initial discovery. Judge Murphy: I'm asking you to do it after we close up shop. I've got other things I need to do in here after everybody leaves, and my folks don't get overtime, so... Okay, unless there's anything else from the parties, Miss Eaton? Miss Eaton: No, thank you. Mr. Lindsay: No, Judge. Judge Murphy: Okay, court will be in recess until tomorrow. We'll follow the same protocols. Thank you. The hearing was adjourned on the first day of Barry Morphew's proof evident presumption great preliminary combined hearing at 4:56 p.m. on Monday, August 9th. It appears the first day was full of plenty of attempts by the defense, which took up nearly an hour more than the prosecution, attempting to cast plenty of doubt and throw a lot of shade, hoping to get people to believe that Suzanne was still alive somewhere, maybe hiding out in Ecuador, just waiting for her lover, Jeff Libler, who was afraid of losing his job and everything else after Suzanne went missing. They're trying to cast plenty of doubt, attempting to tell people that Suzanne is still alive and just hiding out somewhere. Next up, we'll move on to day 2 and see everything that happened there as we still count down and await Barry Morphew's September 17th hearing, which should be a doozy. Let's close with Psalm 121, 1 and 2. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. Stay tuned for the next video about the Suzanne Morphew case.